Hello everyone, welcome back to another video here on the channel Charles Morris. And in this video specifically, I'm going to be talking about how it just offends Nintendo so much that when these emulators are used to actually down when players actually use these emulators, such as like the Yuzu emulator, which is the Switch emulator, which was used to download 100 million illegal copies of Legend of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom. That was something that Nintendo found very offensively. And what the user emulator really did was it just gave players early access to Legend of Zelda Tears of Kingdom before it was actually released, and Nintendo had a problem with that. Nintendo found this as copyright infringement, and so what was actually done was when it came the day that the creators of the Yuzu emulator made an agreement with Nintendo that the creators of Yuzu would shut down the Yuzu emulator, and as a result here, the creators of Yuzu paid $2.4 million in damages without having the case go into court, and the Yuzu emulator was forced to actually shut down immediately. Same thing that now, I don't know when this is going to happen, but apparently there is so what you see right now is exactly what the pizza emulator actually really does. And it's an emulation of Game Boy Advance games, which are used to actually download GBA games. And you may have guessed it, but Nintendo would pretty much almost like find it very illegal, as much as this. What emulators really do is it gives people access to actually download Nintendo's first party games illegally. Now, I know this may sound very, very offensive, but when you mess with companies and their copyrights, they don't really like it, and then they want to take specific action against you, and actually just, if you're an emulator creator and you want to try to mess with Nintendo and their copyrights, and you may want to be careful on creating emulators and giving access to people who can use that emulator to actually give you access to a bunch of Nintendo games that can be used to actually illegally download copies of Nintendo's first-party software. And that's a problem Nintendo has. They had these kind of problems in the past. So, I mean, again, take it to me as I'm just lying and just you can take it like that. I mean, from a business perspective here, this is exactly why Nintendo is actually do this. It isn't good for their business, since other people are taking software from Nintendo and downloading it as illegal ROMs or whatever. Alright? That's copyright infringement, and companies can have like a real big problem with other people just performing like some kind of piracy or doing whatever they can to infringe upon Nintendo's copyrights. Okay? That's a problem that Nintendo can have with some people, and it's just not good. Also, the person may not even want to deal with the fact and the headache of actually having to go to court for some lawsuit charge that Nintendo themselves is actually going to want to actually want to file a lawsuit against you for infringing upon their copyrights. Maybe not the person that downloaded ROMs or illegal downloads, but maybe the emulator creators and the person that probably downloaded illegal ROMs of Nintendo's first-party titles. They may even have to go to court and owe Nintendo a lot of money. And that could be a headache to do. I mean, nobody likes the fact that they have to just settle certain situations in court because they themselves just decided to actually just go ahead and go ahead and just illegally download Nintendo's first-party titles off of certain emulators and that stuff. And that is where well, that is just how it is. The more that these emulators are created, and the more illegal downloads that people use on Nintendo's first-party titles, the more that they can find themselves in a bunch of serious trouble. And, if you don't want to be in trouble with Nintendo, I would encourage you to stop using emulators to download Nintendo's first-party software illegally. if you don't want to, like, literally deal with the headache of actually having to be taken to court by them. So, yeah, that's just it. It's not that Nintendo really likes to be anti-consumer with the customers, with their customers, that for the people that love Nintendo games and download it off of an emulator that was not created by Nintendo, okay, that's a pretty big problem. This is, as Nintendo sees it, as copyright infringement, which they don't like. So, what is Nintendo really going to do here is they're actually really going to, is just, they're going to hit emulator creators with lawsuits, and then they're going to want to take these copyright infringement cases to court. And that didn't happen with Yuzu, but, you know, overall, this is what this is what Nintendo would do, and Nintendo would take emulator creators to court, and then emulator creators would be expected to pay a huge amount of money in damages, and, you know, people would be so upset with Nintendo, and they would go on rants against Nintendo about why Nintendo is just so unfair and that stuff. When in reality, the bigger picture is Nintendo just hates copyright infringement. When they feel like their copyrights are going to be infringed upon, then what they do is they just go after these emulator creators, and they want those emulator creators to pay a huge amount of cash in damages to Nintendo's copyrights, or for infringing upon Nintendo's copyrights, and then these emulators are forced to shut down. So the pizza emulator that is used to download GBA games, and because it's Nintendo's first party titles, and because they're copyrighted by Nintendo, this means that Nintendo will have the rights to actually just force the creators of that pizza emulator. They would be seeking to actually looking for the creator of that emulator, that GBA emulator, Pizza Emulator, I believe that's what it's called. They're going to want to just have those emulator creators be forced to pay a huge amount of money to Nintendo, and then that emulator that is used to give people access to download Nintendo's first party GBA titles onto that emulator illegally. When people download GBA games illegally to that specific emulator for that GBA emulator, the fact here is those emulators creators are going to have to pay a huge amount of money to Nintendo in damages. And they're going to want to have that emulator shut down immediately. And this may look very offending to a lot of people. This would start people just getting upset with Nintendo, going after emulators and that stuff. And maybe these big people just, maybe these people just don't even understand that this is just about Nintendo just caring about their copyrights. This may look like Nintendo doesn't care about the consumer or anything like that, and like Nintendo is just the bad guys out there that are just trying to just ruin people's childhood or whatever and that stuff. I mean, whatever it is, man. Most of all, this is about Nintendo protecting their copyrights. So, even though it may look like this may not be the case, the reality is, it's just when businesses feel like somebody is going to do something to like copyright, like try any copyright infringement against a certain company, they're going to they would have a big problem with that. And then eventually what they would do is they would just, that person would actually end up getting in trouble with the company, and they'd be expected to pay a huge amount of cash in damages to that company just because they decided to just copyright infringe them. That is, if anybody decides to use emulators as a way to actually just download Nintendo's first-party titles illegally, that could get into some serious trouble with Nintendo. And when that happens, you have to owe Nintendo a lot of money in damages. And then that emulator, whatever emulator was used to download Nintendo's first-party titles illegally, I don't care if it's NES up to Switch, whatever emulator it is, if that's used to download Nintendo's first-party titles illegally, those emulator creators will have to pay a huge amount of cash to Nintendo in damages, and they'd have to shut down their emulators immediately. I apologize for offending people in this video. This is not the stuff that people actually want to hear me actually say, but, you know, I just take stealing another company's software on an emulator like it's actually stealing a company's copyrights from them, like copyrighted works, and actually downloading it onto an emulator that Nintendo just didn't create. Now, the ones on the Switch, however, they were made by Nintendo. And for that, that's fine. Nintendo owns the copyrights of those emulators that were put on the Switch and the titles that they put on the Switch. But when it comes to emulator creators other than Nintendo, that's where it becomes a problem. And then those emulators just give other people access to download Nintendo's first-party titles according to what emulator